Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 178. Chapter 178. Rostov, with his keen sportsman eye, was one of the first to catch sight of these blue French dragoons pursuing our Uhlans. Nearer and nearer in disorderly crowds came the Uhlans and the French dragoons pursuing them. He could already see how these men, who looked so small at the foot of the hill, jostled and overtook one another, waving their arms and their sabers in the air. Rostov gazed at what was happening before him as at a hunt. He felt instinctively that if the hussars struck at the French dragoons now, the latter could not withstand them. But if a charge was to be made, it must be done now, at that very moment, or it would be too late. He looked round. A captain, standing beside him, was gazing like himself with eyes fixed on the cavalry below. "Andrew Sasnovich," said Rostov, "you know we could crush them." "A fine thing, too," said the captain, "and really." Rostov, without waiting to hear him out, touched his horse, galloped to the front of his squadron, and before he had time to finish giving the word of command, the whole squadron, sharing his feeling, was following him. Rostov himself did not know how or why he did it. He acted as he did when hunting, without reflecting or considering. He saw the dragoons near, and what they were galloping in disorder. He knew that they could not withstand an attack, knew there was only one moment, and that if he let it slip, it would not return. The bullets were whining and whistling so stimulatingly around him, and his horse was so eager to go that he could not restrain himself. He touched the horse, gave the word of command, and immediately, hearing behind him the tramp of the horses of his deployed squadron, rode at full trot downhill toward the dragoons. Hardly had they reached the bottom of the hill before their pace instinctively changed to a gallop, which grew faster and faster as they drew near to our Uhlans and to the French dragoons who galloped after them. The dragoons were now close at hand. On seeing the hussars, the foremost began to turn, while those behind began to halt. With the same feeling with which he had galloped across the path of a wolf, Rostov gave rein to his Donet's horse and galloped to intersect the path of the dragoons' disordered lines. One Uhlan stopped. Another, who was on foot, flung himself to the ground to avoid being knocked over, and a riderless horse fell in among the hussars. Nearly all the French dragoons were galloping back. Rostov, picking out one on a gray horse, dashed after him. On the way he came upon a bush. His gallant horse cleared it, and almost before he had righted himself in his saddle, he saw that he would immediately overtake the enemy he had selected. That Frenchman, by his uniform an officer, was going at a gallop, crouching on his gray horse and urging it on with his saber. In another moment, Rostov's horse dashed its breast against its hindquarters of the officer's horse, almost knocking it over. And at that same instant, Rostov, without knowing why, raised his saber and struck the Frenchman with it. The instant he had done this, all Rostov's animation vanished. The officer fell, not so much from the blow, which had been but slightly cut above his arm, as from the shock to his horse and from the fright. Rostov reined in his horse, and his eyes sought his foe to see whom he had vanquished. The French dragoon officer was hopping with one foot on the ground, the other being caught in the stirrup. His eyes, screwed up with fear, as if every moment expected another blow, gazed up at Rostov with shrinking terror. His pale and mud-stained face, fair and young, with a dimple in the chin and light blue eyes, was not an enemy's face at all suited to a battlefield, but most ordinary, like a home-like face. Before Rostov had decided what to do with him, the officer cried, "I surrender!" He hurriedly but vainly tried to get his foot out of the stirrup and did not remove his frightened blue eyes from Rostov's face. Some hussars who galloped up disengaged his foot and helped him into the saddle. On all sides, the hussars were busy with the dragoons. One was wounded, but though his face was bleeding, he would not give up his horse. Another was perched up behind a hussar with his arms round him. A third was being helped by a hussar to mount his horse. In front, the French infantry were firing as they ran. The hussars galloped hastily back with their prisoners. Rostov galloped back with the rest, aware of an unpleasant feeling of depression in his heart. Something vague and confused, which he could not at all account for, had come over him, in the capture of that officer and the blow he had dealt him. Count Osterman Tolstoy met the returning hussar, sent for Rostov, thanked him, and said he would report his gallant deed to the emperor, and would recommend him for a St. George's Cross. When sent for by Count Osterman, Rostov, remembering that he had charged without orders, felt sure his commander was sending for him to punish him for the breach of discipline. Osterman's flattering words and promise of reward should therefore have struck him all the more pleasantly, but he still felt that same vaguely disagreeable feeling of moral nausea. But what on earth is worrying me, he asked himself as he rode back from the general. Ilian? No, he's safe. Have I disgraced myself in any way? No, that's not it. Something else, resembling remorse, tormented him. Yes, that French officer with the dimple. And I remember how my arm paused when I raised it. Rostov saw the prisoners being led away and galloped after them to have a look at the Frenchman with the dimple on his chin. He was sitting in his foreign uniform on a hussar's pack horse and looked anxiously about him. The sword cut on his arm could scarcely be called a wound. He glanced at Rostov with a feigned smile and waved his hand in greeting. Rostov still had the same indefinite feeling, as of shame. All that day and the next, his friends and comrades noticed that Rostov, without being dull or angry, was silent, thoughtful, and preoccupied. He drank reluctantly, tried to remain alone, and kept turning something over in his mind. Rostov was always thinking about that brilliant exploit of his, which to his amazement had gained him the St. George's Cross and even given him a reputation for bravery. And there was something he could not understand at all. So others are even more afraid than I am, he thought. So that's all there is in what is called heroism? And did I do it for my country's sake? How was he to blame with his dimple and blue eyes? How frightened he was. He thought that I should kill him. Why should I kill him? My hand trembled, and then they gave me St. George's Cross. I can't make it out at all. But while Nicholas was considering these questions, and still could reach no clear solution of what was puzzling him so, the wheel of fortune in the service, as often happens, turned in his favor. After the affair at Ostrovna, he was brought into notice, received command of a hussar battalion, and when a brave officer was needed, he was chosen. And that concludes my reading of chapter 178 of War and Peace. I will now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 178. Absurdity, injustice, and a bestial kind of madness. Nicholas continues apace with his tour de force of change and personal development today. He begins the chapter by channeling first Boris and then Prince Andrew as he rushes into battle. From Boris, he borrows an eye for opportunity, noting an opening of attack against the onrushing French dragoons. Hoping to capitalize on this opportunity, he borrows from Prince Andrew, and Tolstoy's, idea that it's the agency and spontaneity of individual soldiers who mold the battle, not the generals, and he leads the charge against the dragoons. At first, things go brilliantly. His charge is a success. The French dragoons draw back. The ones who don't are taken down. Nicholas himself takes down one particular dimpled French dragoon, striking him down with his saber. But something happens inside of Nicholas when he sheds this man's blood. The animation born of the rush forward in battle depletes completely. A confused feeling, something akin to shame, fills his heart. For the remainder of the chapter, Nicholas broods and meditates over the fate of this dimpled French soldier. His thoughts of the absurdity and injustice of war lead him to an almost proto-Tolstoyan position of pacifism. And all just in time for his superiors to award him the St. George's Cross and a starring role in any future attack in need of a brave officer. Poor guy. Daily meditation. The vice of cruelty is not innate to man, and is unworthy of man's kindly temper. It is a bestial kind of madness to delight in blood and wounds, to cast off humanity and be transformed into a creature of the forest. Seneca on clemency. And that concludes my reading of and reflection on chapter 178 of War and Peace. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me today. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are down below in the show notes. Tomorrow, we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 179. Hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.